So we're going to get started now. Welcome everyone to this beautiful room. It's very fitting that we're in this room that we built about 100 years ago, building, talk about the digital revolution. I'm Rob Atkinson. I'm president of the Information Technology Innovation Foundation. And we're really pleased today to release a new ITIF report, Digital Quality of Life. And I think it's a good lesson that while digital usually gets it right, analog doesn't. So if you look at the report, the big report, it says executive summary on it. The actual report is about that small. We didn't bring it. Or the printer made a mistake and put executive summary on it. So that's not the executive summary. You actually read it. But I encourage you to read that as well. What we're going to do today, we're going to start off with some remarks by Craig Mundie. He'll then take some questions. He has to run around 1:30, and then I'll make a few remarks as well, and we can ask some questions after that. Let me introduce Craig first of all. Craig Mundie is the Chief Research and Strategy Officer at Microsoft. He reports directly to CEO Steve Ballmer. Mr. Mundie is responsible for directing the company's technical strategy and long-term investments. In that role, he oversees Microsoft research and other technology and research initiatives, the company's health and education business, and a number of technology innovations. Previously, he was Microsoft's Chief Technology Officer for Advanced Strategy and Policy, and he worked with Chairman Bill Gates to develop Microsoft global strategies around technical, business, and policy issues. He joined Microsoft in 1992 to run the consumer platform division. During that time, he did a number of things, championed the trustworthy machine tenet, and significantly improved the security of Microsoft products. In 2000, Bill Clinton appointed Mr. Mundie head of the National Security and Telecommunications Advisory Committee, where he advised White House staff. In 2002, he joined the Task Force on National Security and Information Age. Craig and I are both on that. He developed a strategy for using technology to address new security challenges. He actually had a long background in IT and technology. He started in 1970, worked for Data General Corporation, which was one of those companies that took the wrong strategic choice and ended up going down the wrong path, and not the micro path, but the mini path. In 1982, he was one of the three founders of Alliance Computer Systems Corporation, and he holds a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and a master's degree in information theory and computer science, both from Georgia Tech. So please join me in welcoming Craig Mundie.
Rob, it's a pleasure to be here in this great place too. I love visiting here. As Rob said, I joined Microsoft almost 16 years ago, and I went there at the time because Bill Gates and the first CEO of Microsoft, Nathan Myhrvold, had a belief at that time that computers would find their way into everything. And of course, for Microsoft, we were well known at the time for our focus on personal computing. And here we are 69 years later, and we're issuing a report about the role of IT and the quality of life. And many of the things that I focused on in creating a lot of these platform technologies, which were clearly not in everybody's vocabulary 15 years ago, now everybody takes for granted. In 1993 and 4, we set out a plan at Microsoft that says, look, there's a few things we think are really going to be important when they get smart and get connected. Phones, cars, game consoles, television, as well as the traditional things we call computers. And back then that seemed pretty avant-garde, and today, your kid grows up and expects that he's got a cell phone, play games, connected to the internet, watching television, and he's increasingly delivered over the IP network, on the computer, not just on traditional TV. And so here we are. I think while this was all going on, IT also had another very important role to play, which is it has become the key driver in advances in virtually every field of science and engineering. And it's pretty safe to say that there's no field now that can advance in a dramatic way without aggressive employment of these technologies. And so we're at a time now, as Tom Friedman's book says now, we're kind of, well, this hot, flat, crowded. And the solution to many of these societal challenges, I think, does lie with information technology. But not just the way we think about it as improving business productivity or helping you write a better document. It really is, as this report speaks to, about changing the way that people live and not just changing the way that they work. I think it's also important to realize that today, in a world of about 6.5 billion people, only about 1.5 billion of them have really any use of any of these advanced technologies. And yet, many of the societal challenges emanate from the fact that we have such a large body of the planet's population that are either disenfranchised or have such a huge gap in income levels and education and healthcare levels that, that in itself breeds a set of societal challenges. Some people believe that many of the roots of the expanding terrorism problem, really are associated with those kinds of challenges. And so it's pretty clear that in the richest country like the United States, where we don't manage to find a way to give health care to even every American on a guaranteed basis, that there's no way to scale the health care model we have here to another 5 billion people. And I think that the same is true of education. It's those two things are the largest expenditures from all governments on the planet. And nobody's happy with outcomes or effectiveness in either area. And so a few years ago, we started to focus some of our research activities and more recently some new business divisions at Microsoft, specifically at these questions of, is there a way to aggressively use technology to address these questions, specifically of healthcare, education, and improving productivity for everyone, not just improving business productivity in OECD countries, but improving the ability for people to contribute to their own economic well-being at a level that historically wasn't possible, even out to the rural villages of India, China, Africa, Indonesia, etc. And we've made considerable progress there, and I'm personally quite excited by the products that we are now starting to be able to bring forward and the collaboration that we have around many of these questions. I think the report is timely because it speaks not just to the application of information technology to these issues, but the, I think, underestimated importance of getting the policies right within the various levels of government on a global basis in order to be able to get these benefits to occur. At Microsoft, when we think about how we bring technology, if you will, to the next 5 billion people, we tend to break those two broadly and without consideration of their geographic or government environment into two big groups. And the boundary line between the groups is whether they have any disposable income. And so, by definition, if you have no disposable income, there's no business in the traditional sense here. You can't go directly to the consumer and offer them anything. And notably, even though people ignore it, you can't offer them anything on an ad support basis either, because advertisers expect people to spend money on something. And so the world is broadly divided into three regimes: the people who have a lot of disposable income, the people who have some, and people who have none. And the question is, how do we take the technologies that we perfect for the topmost group, which is 1.5 billion that have had access so far, and begin to adapt it in business model and application to the business opportunities for people who have less money to spend, but are interested in these things and are growing as a percentage of the population. And then notably, how do you get them deployed against the challenges of the people who have no disposable income? So despite having interest, they really have no needs. And that, I think, is where policy is really important, because the best you can strive for, in my opinion, is policy that will create a natural combination of these technological advances with the needs of that very large poor population. There's no amount of philanthropy or government gifting even from the rich countries, and certainly not in the poor countries, that is going to be able to by itself lift these people out of poverty. It has to be an approach where they essentially focus on self-help. And that means that we have to substitute technology for trained people. Without that, there's no way to get scale. And so whether you're dealing with the issues of energy, education, healthcare, or in fact just rural productivity, I think these are really essential things to focus on from a policy point of view. So the rich countries should think about policy not only as it applies to their own constituents, but as it relates to solving these societally important problems, and get away from the idea of just gifting people money, and think about how to leverage that such that these technologies become a bootstrapping mechanism in a more self-help kind of environment. I think that that is becoming possible now, and in the next generation of technology will be increasingly possible. I think we're at a time where in all of these intelligent type devices, we're going to transition from the typing and the point and click model to which we historically call the graphical user interface, to a model that I now call the natural user interface, where the interaction between people and machines is a lot more like the interaction between people and other people. And as these things emerge, our ability to take people who are literally illiterate and give them access to these technologies is possible, because they just have to be able to speak or do very other simple tasks. And I think that these are the kind of things that will empower us to significant change. On the other hand, the policy activities within these emerging economy countries also has to be well considered relative to this. That we really focus on these essential problems and how we can use technology to change that. That requires very careful consideration of how communications capabilities are fostered and then made affordable. The programs of training so that people have the minimum amounts of literacy necessary to use these technologies. Not just in the traditional sense of I go to the school and they train me in reading, writing, and arithmetic, but in the sense that the whole population needs to be able to gain access to these things for kiosks, for government record keeping, for electronic government services, as well as things like education and healthcare. I think all of these are possible, and they're happening in a small scale today in ways that are very encouraging. Microsoft has a research lab in Bangalore, India. And one of the charters that we gave them was, in fact, thinking about the development of technologies for the world's rural poor. One of the things that was most encouraging was they took simple technology like a personal computer, DVD copying machinery, which is very cheap now, and assumed that even the poorest schoolhouse had a television set and a DVD player. And they went around and filmed the best teacher in each subject in each district. And said we're going to duplicate those DVDs and we're going to give them to the teachers in the other classrooms who were not considered to be nearly as good. And the idea was that the teachers who didn't understand would just moderate the viewing of the lecture by the great teacher. And that started out, and the kids really thought that was great. But what we didn't anticipate was that the teachers took the DVDs home themselves. And they spent their evenings studying the DVD. And because then they were prepared to show it to the class the next day, and they were more engaged. The next thing that happened was they spent time emulating the great teacher and the methods by which they taught. And it wasn't very long before the teachers who had been written off came in and said, I don't need the DVD. I can give this lecture. And so we not only brought the kids up, but the teaching population was essentially brought up too. All that happened in 1 year within a number of districts in rural southern India. The same technology was subsequently applied a year later to a farm program where the government farm bureau was given this technology assistance mechanism, and in a one crop cycle they were able to make, I forget the number, but something like a 30% improvement in crop yields with no change in the farming technology available to people. Well, the difference there is, subsistence versus you have more than you needed to just survive. And that creates spendable So we've been a big sponsor of ITIF and their work. We're a big proponent of this particular report because it speaks to the breadth of the application of information technology, not just in the rich world, but in the emerging economy and poor segments of the global population. And I think it calls for people to really focus on these policy questions on a global basis. So I want to commend the work that Rob and Daniel have done with their colleagues at the foundation, and we hope that people pay some significant attention to this point. So I'm happy to spend a few minutes taking questions. Thanks, Nora. Hi, good to see you.
I'm going to go to the, can you speak a little bit more, your rights to build more of the policies that you're seeking as far as the acquisition of healthcare?
Well, Rob will give him the floor in a couple minutes, so I'll just give you some of my own thoughts on that. With respect to education, we really would like to see policy advance that allows a more aggressive use of these technologies in personalized type of education, whether that's within the rich world, or in the emerging countries. In the emerging places, they just don't have any quality education, and so there's less resistance to that. In the developed countries, there continues to be some resistance about, what's the role of the teacher and how much technology should the kid have access to. My own belief is today in the United States, kids grow up, by and large, with a lot of access to sophisticated technology, and then they go to school. And it looks like a step backwards to the previous generation. And I think that is a big problem now. And part of the reason kids have a tough time paying attention or being excited about it is we have had both a decline in the quality of the teaching as it relates to some of these really technical disciplines. And the classroom environment doesn't sort of meet their basic standard of what they think world should be like. So I think policies that focus on changing that are important. In our product work, the way we've chosen to address that is we will come out this year in 2009 with 3 new product lines at Microsoft in the education field. One of them is focused on the institution because they need an upgrade of their basic infrastructure. Another is focused on the teachers themselves, because we find that a lot of teachers seek to take independent action and are becoming more aggressive adopters of technology, but the institution generally doesn't foster that. And so we're trying to give them tools and networks and online access to things that allow them to take their own, sort of homemade curriculum, which has always been a big part of teaching, and blend it together with more and more online capabilities and traditional type of textbooks in order to create their own way of presenting that. And then the third is targeted at the student. And the way we think about that is that you can't really address them only when they're in class. And so we want to create a set of software that becomes part of a lifestyle approach to the student and their entire requirement. That allows us to blend together many of the things that they do today with their cell phones and personal computers, whether it's instant messaging or short messaging or other types of Facebook, other types of social networking activities, but bring them into application or directly to the teaching process. And then what we're trying to do is use the internet as a linkage between the teachers and the students first, so that to the extent they can create a bond and drive us forward, the institution can come along later and endorse this on a broader basis. But to do that, we need essentially policy that makes that kind of thing something that can be taken up in the wholesale way.
I like your idea of disposable income as being kind of a driver here. I think it's true. We see that with cell phones, where in Africa and other places in developing countries, there's just this huge takeoff of cell phones that were bought on a personal basis as opposed to, say, the subsidized $100 computer that is still kind of trying to find its market. Where does Microsoft or other IT companies, do you think, are they looking for personally purchasable IT products, where it's not the top down, it's not through the educational systems or whatever, the things
developing countries, you know, I say from our vantage point, the world, countries fall into one of two buckets. There are countries who developed information technology PC first, and then it trickled down to everything else. And in these other countries, they actually are going to adopt their phone first, and then trickle up to everything that we have. And the two are kind of meeting in the middle. So a lot of what we are doing is focusing in those environments on how many of these IT-related services are provided to people through cell phones as the first personally owned computer that they have. But we also recognize in that environment that there are things that you'd like to do on your cell phone that just don't work very well. You want to type a document or read a bunch of web pages and stuff. You know, trying to do it on a 3D screen is not very comfortable. So we're doing a number of interesting things there. One, we recognize that there's a huge market for shared access computers. So internet kiosks and cafes and things like that are very, very popular. Many people don't realize. But if you could get the number right now, but if you go to China, there's something like 300,000 internet cafes. All right, so because so many people in the U.S. have access at home or at work, there's no market for that. You go places where people can't afford to buy that first computer, and the phones aren't internet enabled. They basically go to these shared access environments. So I think that we have to continue to support that. But we've also looked at a way of bridging these things. We have a prototype at Microsoft of a cell phone that has a docking station that you plug it in to recharge it. In this case, the docking station has an output that goes to their television. And when you dock your cell phone, it makes a big screen display on the TV. And as the whole world is shifting to flat panel televisions for all new TVs, even in the poor countries, those things are all computer monitor capable. And so it may be possible that you may buy your first PC, if you will, in the form of a phone that you have mobile access to. And then when you bring it home and plug it in, you get wireline access and a big screen, and you plug a keyboard in, and you've got your own little personal computer. So I think there's going to be a lot of creativity applied around the world to getting people products that are suited to their purchasing power, and through that, bootstrap all this up.
I've got a couple of concerns about human impediments to information absorption. One thing is that control studies have shown that on the average adults, given a choice of whether to inject static into the stream of information or let the information come through clearly, will let the information come through clearly if it is consistent with what they previously believed. If they hear something that would force them out of what they're comfortable with, their comfortable patterns of thought, they tend to inject the static. And I think we see that in with the proliferation of information sources. You have people going to sources that won't teach them anything, that make them comfortable with what they knew previously, and avoiding the new things. So I'm wondering, can we find ways of using technology that help people to overcome some very ingrained patterns of behavior and thinking that are counterproductive from an IT point of view?
Well, the short answer is I think we probably can. But I also think generationally that people are not, being brought up with exactly the same pattern. I mean, if you take, here we are in the Library of Congress. I would say that the people who have the pattern you described, if you put them in the Library of Congress, they probably only go to the sections of the library that were things that they already thought they knew or were interested in. They might not wander down the library halls of other places. And so what's interesting about things like the internet is that as people grow up with this, the range of information that they think they have immediate access to is so much greater than it was in the past, that their interest in discovering things appears to actually be somewhat better. If you take a young kid and you start them out in life and say, hey, you got access to all these things, they don't seem to have nearly the resistance to exploration. In fact, one of the big differences between kids in school and teachers is this issue of fear of exploration. Young kids, I don't care whether you're trying to teach them how to ski or teach them how to go through the internet or use a computer. You give a kid a computer, he doesn't turn to you and say, where's the instruction manual? All right? And in fact, a lot of the time when you use targeted at improving what we call discoverability. Because we recognize that as people grow up with access to these things, more and more, they just want to discover what's in there and then use it. And they don't actually confine themselves to the areas where they've been trained before. And I think that's a big difference between our generation, perhaps, who grew up thinking, you know, somebody's got to teach me how to do things, or I might break it. You know, you hear all of these phrases. And the reality is the kids have no such fear. And as a result, I think that, you know, in a period of a generation or two, we're likely to see that the bulk of the population, you know, wouldn't exhibit the properties that you're worried about, even without a proactive step on the part of the technology. But I think the other thing everybody responds to at every age and demographic profile now is some type of reward, some satisfaction. You know, I mean, if you try something and it works, or you learn something, you're excited about it, and you say, I'll come back for more. You know, if you try something and it doesn't work or makes you feel stupid, you know, then you say, well, forget that, I'm going to go back to the stuff that I'm comfortable with. And in software in the past, a lot of what we did, we grew up focused on the people who were experts, you know, or who needed it for business. And so you made assumptions about that they would be trained, or that they had an ulterior motive for wanting to use the technology. That's no longer true. This stuff is diffused, you know, into the society at every age and stage and for all applications. And I'd say we're still catching up in terms of making the software good enough to give people a comfortable, rewarding experience for, you know, each of their attempted, you know, exploratory activities. And I think that as the computers get more powerful, it allows us to make the software more powerful, and that turns out to be a key to making it ultimately look simpler. And that's our big focus. Okay, one last question, and I guess I'll go. Yes, ma'am.
What activities in the United States are you engaging, let's say, similar to the media education? And what are the cost barriers facing trying to engage with it?
Well, the way we're developing the technology and taking these things to market, we don't really distinguish by country. We just distinguish by, you know, sort of which of these income classes they're at. So for years we've had a program called Partners in Learning, and we have just as many schools in poor districts in the United States that participate in exactly the same way as the poor schools in China and India. So we tended to be blind in the way we looked at these questions and said, look, just what are the needs and capabilities of the school and the income levels of the parents and the, you know, the status of the children in terms of access to these things, and then how do we fit those programs to those places. So, you know, the United States, in some of these ways, allows these things in. But I'd say the biggest challenge that most people, you know, have acknowledged in the U.S. is that you know, the way the teachers, you know, organize tends to, and the way that they relate to school boards and other things in the United States in most areas makes it really hard to inject some of these new models of education into those environments. And you know, you can say that that's one of the places where the U.S. is going to be challenged, I think, in terms of aggressive adoption of these technologies compared to the countries who just don't have that level of either institutionalization or resistance to adoption. All right, thanks a lot, Rob. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate Greg's comments and willingness to spend time with us. We're going to adjourn at precisely 2:20, but before that, I want to make a few remarks and go through some slides. Before I start, I should thank my colleague Daniel Kasher on the game right there, who was my co-author and took the lead on a lot of this work, so really appreciate it. Also want to thank Congressman Arthur Davis, who helped get the beautiful room, the members of the reading room here. Arthur Davis is honorary co-chair of ITIF. I don't know how many people have seen the movie The Graduate, but remember that famous scene where Dustin Hoffman's at the party, he's back in school, and he's trying to figure out what he does with his life. And one of his friends says one word for it, that's plastics. Well, the reason that they said plastics was because what was really driving progress back in that era was essentially atom-based technologies, materials, plastics, steel. That's where progress came from, and that's a very different world than today, where we frankly are not getting an enormous amount of progress from the material world anymore. We've really built out the material world. We've gotten a lot of the advances we know from it. Clean water, jet airplanes, electricity. These are all things now that we have. So I think one of the big mistakes people make about the digital revolution is they try to compare it to the past revolution, where we could see these tangible changes in our lives. Now the big changes that are occurring today are intangible changes. They're not going to, in 20 years from now or 50 years from now, we can stand in this room, we can look out the window, and it'll look essentially the same as it looks today. But it'll function in a very, very different way. And it is functioning in a very, very different way because of IT. So I think that's a really important point, particularly for policymakers who sometimes I think underestimate what's going on today. It's easy to underestimate it when all the changes really you can't touch and feel, but they really are about how things really operate. And I guess I would argue that, as Craig alluded to, most of the big problems that we face today, both in the United States and around the world, whether it's in areas like healthcare or keeping our society safe or responding to energy and environmental challenges, any of these areas, transportation, I would argue that IT is going to have to play a central role in the solution of all of them. In fact, in many of them, IT will be the major innovation that gets us to where we want to go. So let me go through this and talk a little bit about what we found. I think one of the surprises to us is we enlisted a number of outside contributors to this, and we did a lot of the work internally. And when I looked at all the work collectively, it was very clear to me that there were a number of very powerful themes that were driving through it. So we did a report last year called Digital Prosperity, Understanding the Economic Benefits of the IT Revolution. And that looked only just at the economy, and it frankly looked at productivity in agriculture, productivity in banking, services, a whole set of things. But what this report is doing is looking at not about economic benefits, which are indisputably huge, but about quality of life benefits, how the intelligent and connected world is making our lives better. And there are essentially 12 or 13 themes that we found that cross-cut all of these different application areas. You think about the application areas being things like healthcare, transportation, local government. There are all of these sort of functional themes. One of them is just accessing information. You know, and I guess that's the one everybody always thinks of first when you hear about this. But it really is true that in the last 5 years, the amount of information and the ability to access it has grown dramatically. I don't know how many of you have teenage boys or sons, but if you do, they're huge Wikipedia fans. I think mine is. We were watching a movie the other night, and I was telling my son that actor was in a movie, and we couldn't think of the movie, and literally 12 seconds later, my son goes, he was in so-and-so. You know, and how do you know that? Oh, I just looked it up on Wikipedia. And so the ability to know all this stuff, I think one of the most interesting things on Wikipedia is if you're interested in the history of the Klingon Empire, you can actually, I didn't realize that there's there are hundreds of pages on Wikipedia about the Klingon Empire, including a guy named Pathless the Unforgettable. Now, you can say, well, that's sort of funny and silly in a way, but the other thing about Wikipedia and other sources like that, you can find everything you want to know about genetic engineering. You can find everything you want to know about the White House. There are about 65,000 articles on Britannica, about 2 million on Wikipedia. But we see this in other things, language translation. Now we have software that will translate in real time information in other languages. The ability to know where you are in real time through GPS systems. Another big thing I think that's happening is this whole notion of being able to, we have all this information. The digital revolution is allowing information now for the first time to be born digital. But it's not very useful unless you can figure out what it all means and how you get at it. The new kinds of software, the data mining tools are really making a big difference. Data mining of Homeland Security, the ability for Homeland Security to find things, figure out that they may be sources of information they need, and maybe being able to track it down. One that I think is just beginning to occur, and that's what's called rapid learning networks in the healthcare system. There's one now that NIH has been developing called Cancer Biomedical Informatics Grid. What this is they started off with a program where they're looking at rare childhood cancer, where there are maybe only, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 kids a year who get this particular kind of cancer. And they might go to Sloan Kettering, or they might go to MD Anderson, or other centers around the country, but they don't really have very good information on it. So they created this cancer bioinformatics grid where they put all the information together in a very detailed and interoperable way. And they've been able to, because of that, they've been able to find out very important breakthroughs in some of these childhood cancers, that certain types of treatments work better with certain types of kids and others. But that type of ability to bring all of this disparate information together in real time simply couldn't happen even 5, 10 years ago. A little thing called Folded, an interesting program. We did very well on the human genome, but the big challenge now in healthcare is proteomics, is trying to understand how proteins work. And one of the things that Folded is doing is you can go online and play this game that folds, I don't know, I don't really know how it works, but it's something about folding and finding the best way that proteins go together. And people go online and play this game and then submit it up to researchers, and they're making significant progress now in being able to understand protein structure just by people doing it in a game at home. Another big piece of this is that while there are many areas of life and society where markets really aren't appropriate, where government or other types of communal structures are best, there are many areas where markets do a very good job. And we're seeing this, for example, in a number of cities around the country, Philadelphia being the leader. There's a big challenge getting people to be recycling. So what they did is they put little RFID tags, tags on those blue recycling bins we all have. And then when you recycle, they essentially weigh it and it automatically goes to a database. And then if you recycle a lot, you get coupons, free coupons for things that you can get from local merchants and things like that. And it basically increased the recycling rates to 90% in Philadelphia just by giving people that one little bit of incentive. But again, you couldn't do that without the ability of IT. In transportation, the Dutch in 2014 are completely scrapping their gas tax, registration fees, and everything else. They're going to move to 100% vehicle miles traveled fee. It's satellite-based. And the reason to do that is because they can charge people for example, if there's more air problems, pollution in one day, they can raise the fee on particular days. They encourage people to take transit or work from home. They can charge people more to drive on congested roads. They can charge trucks more that weigh more to cause more damage. Electricity meters, we're seeing that now. A number of studies show that if you implement what's called smart meters that charge by the time of day, we all, before the days when we all have almost free long distance, you remember that, you can pay more daytime on long distance and less at night because the network is crowded. Well, that's half of that, because if we could do the same in electricity, we'd significantly cut greenhouse gases and peak loads. It turns out studies have done that show we cut peak loads by about 15% if we use real-time pricing meter. And again, these are enabled by IT. Another big area that's emerging now, and we're actually seeing that, I think, somewhat now in the reduction in VMT that we've seen in the last year, the ability to do things without having to travel is growing significantly. Certainly telecommuting, which is growing. In 2007, teleworkers saved 840 million gallons of gasoline, reduced carbon emissions by 14 million tons. Telework, or what some people call telepresence companies like HP and Cisco. If you haven't seen those systems, they're really mind-blowing. They're big screens that you're in a conference room with a screen across the table of your counterpart in an office in the same city, or it could be across the world, and you're essentially almost in the room with them. You see every little blink of their eye. You see their ability to move. It finally appears that that kind of technology is reducing the need for a lot of business meetings, and there's some initial evidence on that. Other things like telemedicine, the ability to have people, doctors link up with people, e-commerce, the ability, if you're now living in a rural area, it used to be if you lived in a rural area, you were just divorced from many of the advantages you could get from an urban area. But now that gap, if you will, significantly reduced. You can get the same kinds of books, the same kind of watching opera or whatever else you want now, no matter where you live. I think we underestimate. It's just the ability to have a vast amount of choices now because of the digital revolution. Use an example of my son. He was an MSI soccer player for a while. He was able to go online to Nike and buy the precise kind of shoes he wanted, put his name on it, and get a little $5 more, get his team name sewed onto the shoe. That's kind of cool. If you're a 14-year-old boy, you get to have your team name on your shoe for almost the same price. But again, a wide array of choices. driving. Letting people know things in real time. I think this is the big revolution that's going to be occurring in the next few years. If you want to know what the traffic is out there now, you don't know. But again, you will know that. You can begin to know that with your device and map. But the ability to know in real time what traffic is, the ability to know in real time what pollution is. So in Cambridge, Massachusetts, they've outfitted the city with air quality sensors that are hooked up to the internet. So if you have asthma or your kid has a problem, you can go online in the morning and look exactly what the air quality is between where you are and their school, and you'll know what's going on, again, in real time with air quality. You can see that now with pollution monitoring in days. Again, the ability to take all of this information. Tsunami and flood warnings. If we had tsunami warning systems, which we do now, and I think we are there, we would have had that horrible catastrophe, at least not to the extent it was. Flood warnings in North Carolina, they're building a system in the North Carolina Supercomputer Center where they're outfitting streams with wireless sensors to transmit water level data so that they will have much, much quicker ability to predict when floods occur. So that not only can first responders respond more effectively, but individuals can also respond. And monitoring our homes. In many ways, this is an information challenge. We want to know what's going on with our loved ones and make sure they're okay. Certainly home monitoring of cameras, of webcams, and daycare. We have a family member who has early stage Alzheimer's, and he is able to be mobile because he has a GPS-enabled phone that his wife can access on the computer. So she feels more comfortable letting him walk around in the neighborhood and know that she has to know where he is. If he gets lost, she'll know where he is. Without that technology, he would be much more confined at home. Environmental sensors in the home. Really interesting new technology where they're using wireless sensors plus a whole lot of other technology to be able to predict for asthma outbreaks. Intel's developing a technology for older people at home. If they fall, there can be an automatic alert that would go to their caregiver, their family, or someone else. Again, this ability to monitor people, make sure that our family members are safe. One of the other things IT is doing is providing a wide array of higher quality goods and services. So, for example, we couldn't really have the kind of low-cost, increasingly low-cost wind power, solar power without IT. A lot of the new medical imaging that's happening is happening because of IT. The ability of new kinds of medical imaging which can detect many, certainly more things and more accurately than the human body, and wouldn't be done without IT. Making our lives safer. This is one that I really enjoy on this is a company that is called SawStop. It's a little company with a little bit of IT in it, and it's a real saw. It's mostly used now in shops for carpenters and things like that. It's a huge power saw. You might have seen it, power saw, circular saw on your home. But you can take your finger, you can stick your finger right in that saw, and it will stop within what's called curves, 3 curves. So it's actually literally saved scores, if not hundreds of people's fingers from being sawed off because the saw now is intelligent. It knows when your finger is there and it stops like that. If a piece of wood is there, it knows it's a piece of wood and doesn't stop. So that's making it intelligent. We see that now, things like intelligent pill bottles for elderly people. They know what they're taking the right pill or the wrong pill. New tools for public safety. An amazing array of new IT-enabled technology and protocol-enabled technologies that let first responders and public safety know. Computer-assisted surgery, again, amazing technologies where doctors are using computers to perform surgery and robots much more effectively than before. Certainly we all know about this, saving time. I'd particularly like to flag on portable ECGs. You say, well, what's that all about? In many countries, the ability to bring that kind of technology to people is limited because the ECGs are big, huge machines. Companies have developed, I think like the GE, a very small and very low-cost ECG device, and again, could not be done without digital technology. But they can go around now to villages and give people ECG tests and significantly improve health outcomes. This is a whole area I think that people miss here, and that's the ability of IT to make people's lives with disabilities significantly better. The ability, as Craig alluded to, computers now being able to take text, convert it into speech, take speech, convert it into text. One is interesting that again, very empowering technology for people who don't have sight. But again, a whole lot of other, one of the most interesting and amazing things I saw was a few years ago at the Council on Competitiveness annual dinner, where they had technology that an optometrist, I believe, in California has developed an artificial retina. If you think about your little cameras, we get these 6 gig pixel cameras, 600 megapixel cameras. Essentially what they did is they installed more or less that sensing device in somebody's retina, and they took somebody who was completely blind, had lost their sight as an adult, could not see any sight, any vision, any light, installed that in them, and they were able to walk up on the stage unassisted. Now the problem they had with that is that each new, just like with computers and cameras, but each new generation of these sensing retina chips gets better, and so you're faced with a challenge. Should you take this out of the person who's had it installed, or should you give them even better sight, or should you use it on other people? But again, an amazing, amazing thing. The same thing with artificial limbs and computer-aided artificial limbs for people. Facilitating communication, we all know about this, but now the ability to, as Craig mentioned, to billions of people now around the world with mobile telephones, but it's much, much more than that. We're going to, I think a big, big area we're seeing is what people call machine-to-machine communication. Again, just little things that at the end of the day, I think make a difference. A few months ago, I was going to the airport, and my phone rings, and it's an automatic call I get from United Airlines whenever my flight is going to go off. So that's programming. You just go online, program it, have the computer call your cell phone. Well, there's one where I was actually in the hotel room, ready to leave, and it called my cell phone, and it said, "Your flight has been canceled." And so that was good to know. I didn't have to go to the airport. I was able to immediately go online and get another flight. Again, that ability just to know things and have that kind of communication is rapidly emerging. Another piece of this is just control that people have over their own lives. I think it is true that IT is giving power much more in a much more distributed way, and giving people control and power, whether it's to respond to corporations or to respond to governments that may not be responsive. In this case, farmers being able to, we all know about those cases, farmers getting real-time information on crops. But what's interesting about that is the studies that have shown on that is this is not just a shifted sort of a consumer surplus that, the farmers get a little bit more money and the middlemen or the wholesalers get a little bit less. These technologies actually, not only do they raise farmers' incomes, but they reduce consumer prices. So there's, again, a wide benefits that the ability of patients to look up information and know about medical conditions now. The thing that's sort of an unknown or very little secret in healthcare is that oftentimes patients now know more about their own particular disease or problem and the latest research on that than doctors know because of their ability to do this. I mentioned holding organizations accountable. I don't know how many people recently saw that thing on TV, on the news, about a meat packing plant somewhere in the Midwest, California, I can't remember where there was unbelievable abuse of animals. They were, obviously the meat packing plant, they kill animals, but they were doing it in a very, very unethical and cruel way. Well, the way they found that out was an animal rights advocate went into the plant posing as a worker, was able to bring a very teeny little camera that they couldn't detect, and then posted that video on YouTube. And as a result, without that kind of ability to hold an organization that was doing unethical things accountable, we just wouldn't have been able to do anything. Again, similar types of things now today, whether it's the Sunlight Foundation or WikiLeaks, the ability, for example, WikiLeaks, if you're a government employee and you have something that the government is not doing or doing wrong, and you want to bring that to light without getting in trouble for your personal self, you can do that on things like that. Interesting studies that we cite in there about the ability of using IT to hold corporations accountable for their own ethics standards. And some countries have made great progress on that with being able to make sure that corporations act ethically around the world. So what does that all mean for public policy? I think in the sort of most important way what it means for public policy is that I think policymakers need to start looking front and center at IT as a big part of the solution for many, many areas. Right now, people, I think a lot of policymakers look at IT as something over on the side. Well, Instead, I think they need to think, as Craig alluded to, all right, education policy, how's IT going to play a role there? Healthcare policy, how's IT going to play a role there? Improving homeland security, how is IT going to play a role there? So we see that in a wide variety of areas, whether it's education, healthcare. We did a study earlier where we found that shared that information, healthcare IT can save $80 million a year. That's not counting advances in quality and decreasing energy use. I think one of the things that is a big story I think here in IT is that certainly IT uses energy. All the devices we have, all the servers we use, they use energy. No question about that. The real question is what's the net energy impact? And a number of studies that we cite in here, both from the U.S., there's some other studies from Japan that show that for every unit of energy used, there is anywhere between 6 to 14 units of energy saved. And you say, well, how does that happen? I'll give you an example. When you go to buy a product in the mall, you get in your car, you drive an average distance to the mall and back, you're using about 8 times energy than you would if you ordered that product online. Even though that product has to be shipped in a truck and comes to your house personally. So the whole set of reasons and others why IT is using energy. Service transportation, again, I mentioned that earlier, a lot of the big improvements in transportation are going to come from the use of IT. So the second principle is if government should put the focus there, what do they need to do? One is invest in digital progress. There are many areas where we need to be making serious investments. Again, think about transportation, healthcare, education. For serious investments, in some ways maybe one-time investments to get us up to a digital environment, but we're living in this analog world, not in a digital world here. Craig alluded to this, ensure affordable and widespread digital infrastructure. That includes everything from making sure that we have broadband all across America, making sure that people can afford and use computers. This next point about digital literacy, certainly that's a bigger problem around the world, but it is a problem here in the U.S. when you have about a little over 30% of the population that doesn't use computers. And in a world where, you could say 10 years ago that wasn't maybe a big problem, but in a world where we're moving very rapidly to become all digital, that's going to be a big problem. I think one of the biggest challenges to me is that many policymakers have, we think, unfounded fears about the digital revolution. There's no question that this is uncharted territory we're moving into. It represents change, it represents innovation, but oftentimes policymakers react with, we just need to slow this down or stop it. I love this website, actually, the government of Iowa is on my door. I'm tired of all the technology businesses, but I just get everybody.com. But I do think that's a real concern. You see that moving in some states where they've passed laws banning RFID, for example, or other technologies like that. Don't just digitize existing problems, but we need to use IT to find new solutions to old problems. There's a whole array of areas where we can re-engineer things. Craig alluded to the fact in schools. One of the things that we note in this report is that if you just use IT to reinforce the traditional way of broken learning, you get some benefits, but not really that significant. It's when you use IT to do learning in new ways that are student-centered, that's where you get the really very large benefits. Create usable digital content. What do we mean by that is one of the things government has is it's sitting on a large stack and massive data, but it doesn't make that data available to people. It doesn't make it in sort of XML type reusable ways that other people could then use in kind of mashups and other types of applications. Collaborate and partner with the private and nonprofit sector. Government's not going to be able to do this alone. In many cases, the answer will come from the private sector engaged in innovative applications, or the nonprofit sector. We see that now with broadband. I think the Senate passed a bill yesterday on the data, broadband data and connected nation bill. And again, that's an idea is to empower nonprofits and states to go out and help spur broadband deployment as opposed to government doing it directly. Lead by example. Government needs to do, here's a radical thought. How about if government were the lead user and innovator in these areas as opposed to the laggard? I think in many areas government could be a lead user. It just requires a little bit of bold thinking and bold leadership. And lastly, nudge digital. If anybody's read that book by Kat Sunstein and Richard Thayer called Nudge, there's new interesting work on behavioral economics that show that just the very small nudges can change people's behavior in big ways. For example, one of the examples they use is just shifting the 401k sign up from opt-in to opt-out, so that you automatically are opted into your employer's 401k. If you want to get out of it, you can. Right now, it's the opposite. When you do that, little change, turns out the 401k subscribership goes up by a dramatic amount. You could do the same thing on Dutch Vision, for example. You could have the default be you're going to get your driver's license renewal in digital form, or things other than in digital form, unless you choose otherwise. If we did that, we'd see vast take-ups in digital use. So that's essentially the report. I think, as I said, again, I think the bottom line here is for us, there's been this new developments in how the technology is working and things like GPS in terms of things like sensor networks and a whole wide array of applications that are letting us move to this, what we would call this third wave of IT transformation that we believe just on the cusp of, and I think we can grow and advance that. We will see dramatic improvements in how we live our lives. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments from you all. Thank you.
Creating a useful virtual
Could you identify yourself first?
My name is Karen from Internet News. And number 7 on the public policy, creating a usable digital content. Can you just give some examples of what kind of data you're talking about?
Dan, you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, everything from,
Dan, why don't you come on through?
it can be anything from government data on, where buildings are, or you have National Park Service with lots of trails. You want to go hiking. How do you find that data easily? What can you do with that data? Are these actual GPS points that you can use and put on other mashups? Census data that's out there. Right now, if you go to the Census Bureau or Bureau of Labor Statistics, they have a lot of applications that you can use to access the data. But they don't always have a lot of ways to actually take that information and plug it into something else. You can plug it into SPSS or any other statistics management software. You can't just pull it over easily into Google Maps and do that. You can pull it over into other data sharing applications.
I think one of the things that we think is going to happen is that there's going to be this large array of third-party applications. And you see that with Google Maps and Matchup. There's just thousands and thousands of people that are willing and able to do and create interesting applications. And right now, our government has the view that only the government can create these applications. I think if we had more of an open source government, if you will, open source ID with regard to the data, that people would then use that data and create all sorts of interesting things. There's a good article in the second last issue of Atlantic Monthly about these two researchers who were able to get some data. It took them a while to mash it up, if you will, but they were able to combine this data on migration with crime of the public housing program and find very interesting things that you just would not have been able to find unless they had the ability to play with data. Identify yourself.
Victor Bass, consultant, national security policy. Around the energy supply, the greatest marginal utility IT, although you can say explicitly, is penetrating the underdeveloped world. They do not have these devices and the results to be found. In this sense, IT is a great equalizer. That is, if the underdeveloped world is brought up to the level of developed world, it equalizes society. Now, what you emphasize is how much IT can do for the developed world in specific fields. Has anybody looked into this question? Is IT a great equalizer bringing the developed and underdeveloped world closer to the developed world, or the other way around? Because the gap is widening.
We actually did look a lot at the developing world in the report. There's a chapter in here on the developing world and what's going on. That question, at least if you look at the last 50 years, through neoclassical economic theory, would argue that convergence should happen in low-class countries, which is in fact rich countries. It's actually the opposite. We have rich countries got fast, rich and fast, and in poor countries. It's just an unknown of what's going to happen. You can hypothesize it either way. I guess I differ with you on one point, though, is that I cell phone. I think the applications and devices and other things that are going to be emerging in the next 10 years are going to be just as radical, incremental, just as radical progress here as they will be in the country that doesn't have very much of anything.
David Cheney with SRI. It seems like most of the examples you gave are all things that are really already in the marketplace now. And it's just really, you're really talking mostly about this transmission being really a fusion. Do you look further ahead also at what may be coming, maybe 5 to 10 years out? It seems like this is what you presented to me, those stuff is already pretty much here.
Well, I'll comment on the Daniel comment. If you read the report, there's actually a lot of stuff in there that's, in this part, we're not talking about a lot of invention to happen. We're essentially saying that technology, this new phase of the technology system is developed, but it hasn't been deployed. You take a thing, for example, like rapid learning networks in healthcare. We haven't even begun to scratch the surface. Technology is not that complicated, software, algorithms, and things like that. But deploying it institutionally is the big challenge. And we haven't even started that. If you look at ITS, for example, you can name a few places in the country that are using public transportation. The metro uses it when you go there and you see, Shady Grove trains 4 minutes away, that's ITS. But the ability to use it in a much more profound way, like Stockholm has done pricing, or you go to Korea, and Korea has done this thing where public vehicles and taxis and others have been outfitted as probes with GPS units, putting that data again into this open format, and you can drive in Korea and you'll know in real time every single road and its conditions. You don't get anything near that in the U.S. So you're right in the sense I don't think there's a lot of invention that we're talking about, but there's a vast deployment challenge that we face.
Sure, I just also add that when you talk about not, Rob talks about not having a lot of additional invention, you have a lot of additional content. So, for example, in online learning, that's definitely there, and getting it to more people is important. Developing all the new content, you have plenty of applications and text-to-speech technology in existence, but actually deploying that in a meaningful, usable interface is still a lot of work to do there, and still a lot of progress.
Yeah, I'll just I'm curious, when we're looking at the area, wondering whether this is very compatible information, whether you were surprised by the information at all, whether you treat us from wherever it's out there, and what do you think the result would be, or reaction to the other audiences, policy that have fairly good sense of all these technologies around here? This is documents that are polarized.
I honestly wasn't really surprised. I live and breathe this world, and I am kind of the biggest, I think, digital tech geek promoter you can imagine. But when we got all this together, and I saw what was happening in each of these areas that we were looking at, and the amazing innovations that are going on, I really was surprised. I was surprised not just that, go back here, but I don't think it's just simply a question of, hey, we all got to get one of these, and it's just, let's get more of that. These things are going to change in dramatic ways. Just to use an example, there's going to be a whole set of new applications. So I really was quite surprised. I don't think policymakers know this at all. I recently spoke at a state legislative leaders forum in Chicago with speakers in House, Senate Majority, and types around the country. Granted, when you're at that level, you tend to be in your 60s and 50s, like I am. But I got the impression that they just really weren't even aware of these devices, much less that we're talking about. So I do think there's a challenge. I think part of it is we all who are into this space have to figure out compelling ways, compelling messages to get people to realize that the internet revolution or the IT revolution is nowhere near mature. And it certainly didn't peak in 2000. If anything like that now is all like that. So I think there's a challenge there.
I'm Jonathan Lisa from London School of Economics. You'll allow me a bit of an analogy, somewhat distant, but in the 19th century, the United States was confronted with a situation where a great deal of agricultural knowledge was in the hands of specialists and being used by good farmers, but were very poorly disseminated and poorly coordinated. The Morrill Act and the land-grant college system was an extraordinarily bold step by the government to create institutions which would address the two great problems that they saw about how the foundation of the economy was going to be improved, and improved not only by disseminating, but increasing the quality of the schools. And we have now, as a result, of course, the land-grant college system, but all of the knock-on effects in agriculture and higher education sense. I see very little of that kind of boldness of thinking in our current discussions about IT policy. I think that we should be thinking about the ways in which the foundations of the economy can be addressed by real instruments that government has to do things on a scale that would make a difference to the lives of people and the structures of institutions, perhaps thinking boldly on the scale of the establishment of the agricultural extension stations, the land-grant colleges, and the knock-on effects that that had for the foundations of the economy and society through education.
Well, we should talk more about that. I think that certainly the part I think you're getting at, which is the key here, is about institutional change and learning. And a lot of the challenge in this space is not about, I mean, TI makes stuff, good stuff, Dell, all these companies make good stuff. And they do amazing R&D. That's not the challenge. The challenge is about institutional usage and understanding and learning. And then putting things together, that are sort of not quite connected yet. So I think there is a lot that government can do. We've been a proponent of creating a federal CIO for a while, which is, in our view, not just a person in the White House, but a person with a fairly significant staff and budget who would think about how do you drive digital transformation throughout the economy? How does that person in the White House make sure that the DOE is doing what it needs to be doing, transportation is doing what it needs to be doing, commerce, other agencies. So another part of that too, I think, is an area that we've done almost nothing on, particularly compared to a country like Korea. And that's this issue of how do we get people who don't know or can't afford or just simply don't use digital technology. If you look at a country like Korea, which probably I would argue is the best advanced side programs in the world, we pale in comparison to what they've done. We don't even think about it in a serious way. So there's lots and lots of things that I think are ready and ripe that we could do, and we're figuring out exactly what that is and we're going to challenge. Yes, sir.
Sam Castro, how do you recommend the natural inclination to stick with the patterns of digital technology you've already learned? For example, when I was a kid and got my first cell phone, I thought I was pretty savvy doing this whole discoverability idea where I could figure out how to use it. I was smarter than my dad and my mom. But now that I've had 6 cell phones and they've all been from different companies, and now, for example, when Microsoft transitioned from XP to their discipline, I personally have a stronger distance to trying any new type of technology. How do you deal with that hurdle of innovation?
Well, I guess the key is I think that most of the big innovations that we're talking about are not necessarily, they may come through those platforms, but they're not just simply about those platforms. So, two things. One, the technology actually does get easier every year. Sometimes that process is a little slower than it is, but it's still complicated stuff, but it gets easier every year. For a lot of people, though, you have home security networks. You might not want to get a new cell phone, but you might say, yeah, I really want a great IT-enabled home security network that I link up to my broadband connection and my cell phone. The ability to do that is getting easier and easier. You don't need there's a lot of these systems now, you just go to Home Depot, you plug in the sensors, the interconnected into your computer, your phone. So you can sort of do it yourself if you will. So I think in many ways the technology is getting easier. What will drive people will be the compelling value in their lives.
Do you think that the previous patterns of how we develop the processes about how to use those applications, do you think that's the next innovation about? Because it seems like, for example, if you look at remote control, there's a button on remote control that every engineer probably thought was a good idea 5 or 10 years ago. But we haven't made our remote controls any smaller. They just got bigger. So do you see a way to overcome this hurdle that kind of keeps us in almost a wagon wheel run, and even though it seems to be a nice weapon?
Sure. I mean, some of what you say, why do we use it as 40 people, right? I mean, there's more efficient people out there. But that was the first one and that's why we all keep using it. But you do have, I think, change that people know about when we talk about cell phones. I
the second one. The first one is I mean, yeah, we've written about that and other things. I guess I wouldn't call that a digital. That's important for a lot of different components of our economy, a lot of different sectors of our economy, openness, trade, and globalization. So to be sure, there are sort of, if you will, maybe other principles that are bigger than all this, but we try to identify principles that really could be applied only to IT. We could put in there a sound financial system. That's important too, which we don't seem to have. So that's one.
On your second point, information security, we do have a section in the back. The last chapter is challenges moving forward, and information security is definitely one of the challenges. In some ways, it's also an opportunity with IT. You have many new ways to secure your information, and the audit access information. There's so many more tools there to really control data. So in that sense, moving forward, I think there's a lot of opportunities. It would definitely be a policy issue that we look at. And I think that's going to stay open. Concerns about technology and progress, you definitely need information security.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And if you haven't gotten a copy, feel free to pick up a copy of the report on your way out. Thank you.